Elon was a fountain of information on Friday morning, and now we know a ton more about Model 3. We got some order timelines, some feature information, and oh yeah, we got to see the first release candidate in motion. So let's kick things off with the good news. Unless you've been under a rock, we know we got our first look, in motion no less, of the first release candidate of the car. It was a black Model 3, and the things to note were the presence, of course, of the autopilot cameras in exactly the same places as on Model S and Model X. The next thing to note was the subtle change to the nose. Instead of having what was termed by most as the lip on the upper part of the front fascia, they pushed that nose downward and more smoothly made that transition from the hood to the front of the car. A Reddit user mentioned it looked like they were kind of evoking Porsche a bit, and I very much agree, and I'm stoked for this change. I personally think it's gorgeous. The car did a quick mash on the accelerator and then did a hard stop, and in the 6-second video posted, it was wonderful. Next up, Elon confirmed that the maximum battery in the Model 3 is going to be a 75 kilowatt hour battery. I love Elon making me look good here, as back in episode 198, I posited that the battery capacities available in the car would be 55 kilowatt hour and 75 kilowatt hour. Now the question here is if they go super streamlined and just make the 55 kilowatt hour battery a software limited version of the 75 kilowatt hour pack. It would make a lot of sense, as I could see a lot of reason to get the product line down to 2 packs, the 75 kilowatt hour and the 100 kilowatt hour packs, after of course they dispense with the 90 kilowatt hour pack. It would also fit with the mantra of making Model 3 affordable and also future-proofing those buyers that end up with buyer's remorse. So it wasn't all good news. Let's start with, firstly, all you HUD folks out there, if the idea isn't dead, it's on life support, and the patient is circling the drain. I noted that first in the video, especially being dark, a HUD would have been readily apparent on the windshield, likely visible both outside and from inside the car. There wasn't anything visible. I also noted that it doesn't mean that still wouldn't be an option. You have to imagine that these release candidate cars will simply be base specs to prove viability. But then Elon came on and totally pissed in everyone's Wheaties. Twitter user @ArcTechInc asked, quote, "So does this mean no heads-up display in Model 3? How will Tesla handle speedometer and instrument cluster information?" End quote. Elon's response and the follow-up should send everyone for the defibrillators. Quote, "The more autonomous a car is, the less dash info you need. How often do you look at the instrument panel when being driven in a taxi?" End quote. Then Fred Lambert of Electrek pressed further, saying, quote, "But you can't build a car with that mindset today, considering autonomous software release is dependent on regulatory approval." End quote. Elon simply responded saying, quote, "It still has one display." End quote. Super disappointing, as I was hoping we'd realize the world where GPS directions were displayed like augmented reality onto the windshield for super foolproof directions to new locations. But it just looks like this isn't going to happen. As disappointing as that was, it wasn't as disappointing as this bit. Look, I'm going to just dispense with any semblance of objectivity here, as this one was a full-on kick in the balls for me, and I'm sure for many others as well. It was revealed that unlike past launches, highly optioned cars will not be going first in line. Rear-wheel drive cars will be leading the charge out of the factory. Now, business-wise, this does actually make a lot of sense. When you're trying to produce as many cars as possible, burning only one motor on a car instead of 2 just makes more sense. In addition, Elon's made it super clear that due to the production ramp, early vehicles will be losing the company money as they get the production line up to speed. So again, it makes no sense to have the highly optioned vehicles losing the company money while they figure out the production ramp, only to have lesser optioned vehicles making less of a margin later on. All that said, they could have tempered this expectation from the beginning. Disappointing the people that were likely your most ardent fans camping out in line to reserve the car on day one doesn't sound like the most sound way to launch the vehicle that will make or break the company. Now, I know there were likely plenty of folks in line who will be getting base-type cars, but I venture a guess that this ratio is something like 4-to-1 in favor of those of us looking for pricier vehicles. So I kind of buried the lead a bit here. Let's rewind. Twitter user @Jim Pengelly, asked Elon, quote, "Will there be a dual motor option? I put a deposit on a 3 with the hope that there would be go-fast options," end quote. Elon's response was, quote, "Yes, but not until next year," end quote. When pressed, again by Fred Lambert of Electrek, asking, quote, First adopters will not have the option of all-wheel drive for the Model 3," end quote. And Elon responded, quote, "No, we are minimizing configuration complexity to keep the production ramp on schedule. Rear-wheel drive only for early production, just like Model S," end quote. Now, Elon is being a touch disingenuous here, as dual motor wasn't even a thing for Tesla until 2014. This wasn't even an expectation for launch owners. With dual motor being a thing on all existing platforms, there's some expectation here. Twitter user @TimShelton followed asking, quote, "How will that impact early reservation holders that want to wait for a dual motor car?" End quote. Elon's response said, quote, "First in line for dual motor as soon as we can make it, which is probably in 6 to 9 months, end quote. But it gets worse the more performance you're hoping for. Twitter user @Dr_Angus asks, quote, "Is there going to be a Performance 3? Would love to see the power of a Model S with the light weight of a Model 3, end quote. Elon's response, quote, probably a year from now. S will still win on acceleration, though, due to having more space for a larger battery, end quote. So that caps it. The first all-wheel drive vehicles are coming in 6 to 9 months from now, and if you're looking for a P75D, you've still got a full calendar year to wait at a minimum. This, of course, is the complete opposite of how dual motor launch actually went, as well as how the general Model X launch went. Lastly, while we're disappointing folks, our friends in the right-hand drive markets, I feel even more for you. Twitter user @DJBurgess asked, quote, "Looks quick. When will right-hand drive versions be on the road in the UK?" End quote. Elon's response, quote, "Should be summer next year. Sorry, really wish we could get right-hand drive done sooner. We truly are working as fast as we can." End quote. So, today was a mixed bag of emotions. It was awesome to get to see the very first release candidate on the road, but for me, the all-wheel drive situation is just super disappointing, and that's putting it really nicely. I'm sure there was much rejoicing among owners planning to get rear-wheel drive cars, and for you, despite my own disappointment, I am super happy for you guys. One other thing to note is that those of us in the all-wheel drive and performance model camps are likely going to miss at least some of the U.S. tax credit. And in a way, this is probably a benefit in helping the folks that need the assistance the most from the credit. But I doubt the full credit will last long into the all-wheel drive cars, and certainly not into the performance cars, unless Tesla decides to ship a pile of rear-wheel drive cars outside the country. I'd say all-wheel drive owners should plan to get a maximum of $3,750, and the performance folks should expect to max out at the $1,875 level. And this is, of course, assuming you're near the front of the queue. If you reserve much past day 2, you should probably not be relying on any sort of tax credit coming your way. Thanks for hanging out with me. The show, again, as I mentioned before, this show operates on a value-for-value model. If you get some value out of what I do each day, please consider supporting me at patreon.com/Tesla Tidbits. Support even as little as $0.25 a month is super appreciated. Also, feel free to support the show with your positive iTunes reviews and subscriptions, as well as across all their services on the internet. And of course, we can't forget to thank our super patrons, John Waltower, Drew Schuyler, Cookie UK, and John Waller for their support at the $10 plus level. And then lastly, feel free to support the show with our friend Drew Schuyler. If you're in the market for a Tesla, get yourself $1,000 off using the referral link ts.la/Andrew1233. If you have feedback for me, the best way you can find me is to tweet @Tesla Tidbits. That's it for today's special YouTube-only version. I'll see you back here next week. Until then, keep it charged and hit the road.